Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 404, featuring an amazing person that I met over at THU 2022. Her name is Eugénie von Tunzelmann, and she is the head of visual effects in the attractions section of Framestore. She is a roller coaster head in a lot of ways, but she is absolutely amazing, wonderful person. Listen, she is so into roller coasters, her entire arm is tattooed with roller coasters on it, and it's just so cool. Brilliant person, really cool, very, very smart, and she was actually on the panel that I did for AI stuff at THU, which was also fun. And in fact, we recorded this entire podcast while at THU in the Oasis, so if you hear some background noise of music and people chatting, that's because we were literally at the Oasis in Portugal, which was a lot of fun. And actually, you should just go ahead and watch it on our YouTube channel and see what's going on behind us. But Kristen, what did you like about Eugénie and what she had to say about all the cool stuff and roller coasters?
Yeah, this one is such a good podcast, especially if you like roller coasters. But she kind of discovered her love of theme park attractions at a young age while on a trip to Disney World, which probably a lot of young people do. But she pursued her dream. And now she's an engineer and VFX supervisor, but now focuses mainly on theme park rides. So we get to hear like the ins and outs of how a ride is created. And I really loved how she said the process is almost like creating a movie, like even from the script. She said it's just like a movie script to production. So that's a really fun part to listen to. And then just from her latest one that she did was Jurassic World Adventure. That was back in 2021, and she has a few more in the pipeline that will be coming out, but she couldn't talk about it in this episode. So keep a lookout for some more theme park attractions from her. But she just also worked on some amazing films you guys discussed, like Interstellar, Man of Steel, Iron Man 2, just to name a few. But yeah, she's like, really, if you set your mind to something, you can really do anything. And that was just so cool to hear from just as a young girl wanting to do that. And now she is.
Yeah, I know a lot of a lot of people enjoy roller coasters and sort of having to think about, how they've evolved so much, especially in the last, several decades, where they're not just about the thrill of the drop of the roller coaster. They're about a story or a narrative and being part of a journey, and designing that story from the beginning is actually fascinating, and sort of hearing it from her perspective about what that's all about and how that happens. And exactly like you said, she loves this and she does it with passion, and it clearly shows in the work that she does. So really cool to do that. Really great to catch up with her at THU. Can't wait to go to the next THU, which I hope I will see her again, because it was a lot of fun to see what she's been up to. But awesome. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements. It is winding down, as you guys know. Towards the end of the year, things start to slow down, and we're starting to ramp up for our 2023 and planning for that. But we still obviously want to let you guys know that V-Ray 6 is out for many of our products. And so go check it out. Just go to chaos.com and check out all the latest versions of V-Ray 6 for SketchUp and Revit and App SDK and Rhino and Cinema 4D and Max and Maya, et cetera. So go check those all out. We do have one other thing that I want to mention. This is happening. This has been going on sort of a little bit more informally, but more formally these days. And that's our Partners in Art program. And this is something where people, some of our users or people we know or people that are interested in this have a passion project that they want to try to get off the ground, and they don't quite know how to do it, and they need a little bit of help. And this is where you can be part of our Partners in Art program. And so we can provide obviously some licensing of V-Ray and some cloud credit, et cetera, but we actually also have some actual money that we can throw your way in terms of those projects. And so if you'd like to apply to be a Partners in Art, we would love to hear your submission. And this can be anything in any kind of field. If it's architecture, if it's media and entertainment, or any kind of thing that you're trying to do, let us know. We'd love to know where we enter and where we can do and to help support you in that project. So just go to chaos.com chaos.com/partnersinart. Again, that is chaos.com/partnersinart. Get all the details and everything you need to know to apply for that. So we'd love to have that you be part of it. And it's something that personally I've actually fostered a lot of these, and I would love to help your project as well. We have one event that's happening literally moments as this podcast is dropping. So you better get on it right away if you're interested. What's going on, Kristen?
All right, so today we have our online event. It's called From Zero to Hero. It's its second edition, and this is focusing on how to secure your dream ArcViz career. And you can find out more about this at chaos.com/events.
Exactly. So remember, this is happening right now. So if you're listening to this as the podcast drops, go ahead and go to chaos.com/events to learn more about our From Zero to Hero program that's happening right now. Now, if people want to know more about the podcast, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And if you guys have any other ideas or questions or comments about the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is labs@chaos.com. And of course, don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcast or anywhere else you get your podcast. But for now, please enjoy episode number 404 featuring Eugénie von Tunzelmann.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Thank you for doing this. I know it's completely impromptu and you've never heard a single one of my podcasts and you have no idea
You
have no idea what we're going to talk about, but that's okay. This is, we've been talking over this last few days, so I know that we can totally make this work, which is basically, let's want to start with your origin story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Back to the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when I was about 6, I was very lucky. I was taken to Disney World in Orlando by my family. And I always say that it was kind of the moment that I went on Space Mountain. Absolutely loved it. Like, particularly there's this bit, for those who know Space Mountain, that you get after the loading platform, you go through this little tunnel and there's all these blue chasing lights. And it's like a launch sequence, sci-fi launch sequence. It's really exciting. It gets your adrenaline going. And, you know, I just thought it was like the coolest thing that ever happened to me, I suppose. But then, so for a while I wanted to build roller coasters. I used to draw them a lot as a kid. And that kind of made me start to think while I was a kid that I wanted to study engineering and go that way. Mm-hmm. But then when I was like a young teenager, early 90s, things like Jurassic Park, Beauty and the Beast, Terminator 2 came out. And I was like, maybe I want to do that. And then there was things like the spiders in Jumanji, which were animatronic. And I was like, maybe I want to do that. So felt sort of torn in these various directions. I think it was all of them were some aspects, you know, fairly obviously of sort of engineering, technology, but art and creativity as well. Those were the things that really sort of fired me up. So I went to university, studied engineering. Mm-hmm. And the reason I ended up going the visual effects route was that sort of a couple of years in, one of my lecturers, it just turned out he'd been working in the robotics group and they'd been developing software to, initially the aim of it was visual geometry to guide robots around spaces. So it was attaching cameras to robots, working out the shape of the space that they were in so that they could navigate around it. But they basically realized that actually this could be used for match moving. And so they licensed the algorithms that they were writing to a software company, which turned into Boujou, which was one of the first pieces of automatic match-moving software. And that had got them a relationship with Framestore and DNEG and some of the visual effects houses in London. So when I met him, I sort of said, can I do a master's with you? And I ended up doing a master's with that group, and my research was on extending that software, that algorithm, to non-rigid objects, so skin patches and things like that at that point. And that then, when I finished my master's, I sort of spoke to him and said, I think I want to go into visual effects now. I didn't have a show reel, but I had my sort of dissertation from that project. So I sent it out to the various visual effects houses in London. And I was hired by Framestore into the R&D group. So I started out there. I spent a year there, and then they made me redundant. Yay. Which I have no shame telling that bit of the story, because I think it's quite important. Like, it's fine. It happens, these things, life goes on. So then I moved to DNEG, and again, started out as R&D, but sort of it being quite a small company at the time, which is going back a bit because this was 2003, 2004. It was, you could be a little bit more generalist. So I kind of ended up doing some effects work, sort of doing some, started at my first sort of bit of artistic work was doing steam simulations on Batman Begins. Okay. And then I just kind of worked my way up. So through effects, and then did some work on crowd systems there for John Carter. And then kind of went into effects supervision, then CG supervision, eventually on Interstellar. Okay. So then on Interstellar, that was a really amazing project to work on. I was on it for a very long time. And I got to do all the sort of black hole and wormhole simulation work with Kip Thorne. Really amazing stuff to be involved with. Like that was super interesting, and kind of. But then the sort of irony of it was that even though I loved doing the science work that we did on Interstellar, if anything, it kind of made me it made me want to quit my job, not because there was anything wrong with my job, but because it kind of reminded me that actually there is this, tremendous world of like STEM and interesting applications of science and technology and engineering, and that I'd come from, maybe it's film, maybe it's CG, maybe it's animatronics, maybe it's roller coasters, and had ended up very much doing one thing for a very long time, which is basically sort of simulation style work. Right. So then I kind of thought, as sort of coincidence was that then I went on vacation to Orlando for the first time in like 25, 30 years, whatever it was. Right. And saw kind of the changes that had happened to theme park rides. They'd been getting more and more and more ambitious with, sort of, you had your 3D media and pyrotechnics and animatronics and music and God knows what, ride vehicle movement and everything working together as these. And I was like, I really do kind of want to work in that. It took a little while to work out how to get it to happen, and really it was just kind of a coincidence, which is that I kind of heard through a friend who'd worked on one of the Harry Potter rides that Framestore were considering setting up a dedicated rides department, and I basically called them up and said, that's interesting, I want to work in rides, and so they hired me as the supervisor on their first rides project, basically, and then I've been there now for 7 years, 6.5, 7 years. Wow. My title is now officially head of visual effects attractions, which is quite a specific title just to me, but basically I look after all the visual effects on our attractions and rides work. Okay. So that's what I do. All right.
And so when you say visual effects for rides works, are you doing just the CG that's there, or are you involved with the concept and design and the mechanics and all the other stuff of the ride?
So interestingly, it varies. The most sort of, at the very least, we will be creating the visual effects media for any screens that are in the ride. Right. So screens on the ride, safety films, all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But it's the most fun, and it often does happen when our stuff blurs out more into the rest of the attractions. So for example, on the first project that I worked on, which was a project called Pearl Quest, it was in China. Mm-hmm. It was really great because we were doing the screen media and we were doing audio as well. But also we were designing all of the characters, all the environments and everything, which all had ramifications in the physical environment and everything else. So we ended up being heavily involved across the board. And then we also ended up handling a lot of the ride vehicle programming, partially just because I think that because we always start out by doing previs, and the previs is quite elaborate and it takes you through the whole attraction, then that ends up sort of having knock-on effects on everything else. So we often end up being the sort of most obvious people to do that kind of work.
Right, of course.
And that was actually super fun because the ride vehicle programming, we had a visual version of it. We had the ride vehicle moving from screen to screen in CG, but it was, initially, I think that our clients at the time said, well, we'll use that animation.
Right.
But from my point of view, we hadn't thought remotely about what any of the physical limitations of the ride vehicle were, because it wasn't ours to engineer, it wasn't our thing. So we were like, well, I don't know, it was just an idea of like, it's going to go up and down, but
you don't know what the G forces are or anything.
You didn't know anything. So, but then it was great actually, because I then got to work with the engineers. I was like, well, can you give us those limits?
Right.
Far more complex than I think I'd anticipated, because it had like 27 different physical limits as part of, every single degree of freedom had, a distance limit and a speed limit and an acceleration limit and an acceleration onset limit or jerk limit. So, so I wrote some tools to analyze our animation and kind of flag any places where we were out of sort of safe or plausible movement, and so we could reanimate and upload that to the cars, etc. And so that ended up being actually super fun.
Yeah. So I mean, you've had a passion. I mean, I know because I've spoken to you for a few days, but you have an absolute passion for roller coasters.
Rides in general.
Yes, real passion, and you sort of, and it's what's it like, first of all, to work on the thing that you've always loved for so long and making that part of your job?
I mean,
does it spoil it for you?
No, it's great. I mean, it's I think that even potentially even more so than film, it's still amazing when you get to go on it, because for the whole duration of, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, or whatever that you're working on an attraction, it is still just an idea in your head. It's still very much a virtual piece of design. So then nothing compares to actually getting there and getting on it. I mean, that's still a huge body shock, I suppose. It's still which actually all the years that I was working in film, I still hugely enjoyed. I think everyone enjoys when you go to the cast and crew screening and you see it for the first time. It's a lovely group experience, but it's highly likely that you will have seen an awful lot of those sequences, at least in rough cut form, many, 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 many times. So maybe you haven't seen it all together with the music and everything like that, which is great. But like I find the ride stuff more sort of surprising and exciting to go and get on it, really. So it doesn't ruin it for me. I will say that any job is work and inevitably has its frustrations and its creative cycles where you feel like you were getting certain place and then you're going back to the beginning and so on. But I the fact that there's day-to-day challenges doesn't change the fact that I am absolutely doing my 6-year-old dreams.
Right. Right.
And it's a joy to do it.
That's amazing. So take us through a process. You say, some of the process can take 2 to 5 years to build this roller coaster. So let's go through an example of one of like, what is that process? How does that happen? And where does it,
So, I mean, it's very tricky to generalize. The shorter projects are the ones where you're retheming an existing attraction. So we've done quite a few of these where you've got an attraction, whether it's a dark ride or a roller coaster or a walkthrough experience or whatever it is, that's maybe 25 years old or something like that, and it's looking a little bit tired, or they just want to refresh it, give it a bit of new life. Sometimes retheming, completely new IP put onto it. And those are the fastest because the thing already exists. In many ways, they can be it can be a kind of slicker experience, because I have to be careful not to share anything that's NDA'd, but we have in the past tested our new vision for the attraction by putting it into VR headsets and going and riding the attraction as it stands. So the VR headset is purely a developmental tool. It's never going to be a VR attraction, but it's for us to test our previs in situ.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting kind of way to assess your previs. It is a perennial problem that testing previs in the abstract, I mean, you're probably aware if you put on a VR headset and it's doing a roller coaster and you're just sitting still, it's very likely you get sick.
Yeah.
So that's not the most pleasant way to assess and you have that process at the beginning where you're trying to get the project green lit, or at least you have the executives on board with what the design is, and you can't put a headset on an executive and have them vomit and then go, yeah, that's great, we should build that. So being able to ride it is a great help, but usually that's not the case, right? The ride is being built, so it doesn't exist yet. So that is a harder process. And what tends to happen is that it does depend which client we're working for and what their general practices are. And some of the bigger places have different processes from the smaller ones. But in general, there will have been a traditional script, which actually it didn't occur to me that you would script rides the same way you script a film, but they do. They script it out. It looks exactly the same as a script that you would see for a movie, and it's minute by minute of the guest walking through the experience. So they walk first into a room and they see this happen, and then they walk into this one, and if there's any media, this character will appear on a screen next to them, welcome them to the place, and the dialogue will be written out. So it's all a script of what you experience as a guest, and then that will be turned into potentially storyboards, or usually a 3D animatic, sort of increasingly Unreal based, and that'll either be done by us at Framestore or it'll be done by the client, depending on just whether they have that kind of capability their end, or etc. That will iterate for a while, and often we're not involved at that stage. Sometimes we are, in terms of getting creative buy-off from the executives, from the investors, everyone who needs to approve it has to approve it. And as I said, for a roller coaster, that's a challenge. But I guess you watch it on a flat screen rather than in a headset, so that you don't throw up. And then at some point it will be greenlit, at which point everything starts. So pouring concrete happens at the same time as we start going into media production, in very much the same way as you would for a film. So we start storyboarding. If we need to do live shoots, we plan the live shoots and we do them. We did a whole recent run of projects for Jurassic World. So we did 5 attractions across the world for that.
Okay.
And that involved shoots with the cast, which, as much as possible, you try to, if you can, combine with shoots of the films that are happening at the same time, so that you can kind of get the cast together at the same time. So we plan all of that out and effectively go into sort of traditional media production. Where it differs is that delivery is quite a different thing. We are, in general, we are not sending shots to a client-side editor who then takes them from there. That's not really how it works. We tend to be finishing things to an extent. They will be comps that we've taken to 75%. And then my preferred way of finishing, though it again depends on the specifics of the project, but is to then go out to the site and finish the comps in situ. So if you can, you get Nuke talking directly to the big projectors, and you comp the final stages on site. That requires site access and final show lighting and all of that kind of thing. But when you do it, it's fantastic because you can get really good integration between your physical set and get all your color temperatures looking perfect together and all of that kind of thing. So,
you have to be really involved.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that, like the young 6-year-old you and your teenage you who were like, maybe I want to do roller coasters. I don't know, maybe I want to do visual effects and work on big blockbuster films. Maybe I want to work on animatronics. And I just realized you actually are doing all of those things.
Yeah. And it's funny because the one I always omit, because I kind of haven't done it, but it's getting there, is the other one that was drawing my attention at the time as a kid, as well as film and theme park rides and animatronics, was theatrical set design. So like particularly the really big technical sets. I don't know if have you ever seen Les Miserables on stage? Because there's a bit halfway through Les Miserables where the buildings that have formed the little street scene all sort of turn inside out and slot together, and it forms the barricade, and then and that's the scenery change. And the first time I saw it, I was like, what just happened? And it seemed like a lot of the people, I mean, I don't want to be dismissive, but a lot of the people in the audience were not that interested because the singers aren't currently on the stage, and, it's just the set moving around. But for me, it was the most exciting thing. It was like the reuse of all those set pieces in just the incredibly graceful way that it all like completely, like a big transformer, turned into something else. I thought it was incredible. And and I've been quite lucky. I've got a friend who is a theatre director, and she was working in the West End for a while, and she let me go behind the scenes at some of the plays and kind of go and climb on those bits of scenery and all that kind of thing. That to me is another one that's really amazing, and that again can come into play in theme park rides, depending on the sort of ambition. There's a lot of shows and things that are like half show. There's I don't know if you've been on the new Rise of the Resistance ride. It's a Disney one. I wasn't involved on it, but it's what makes it quite unusual and exciting in the theme park world is that it's a multi-stage experience. There is a ride, but there's also a couple of bits of kind of immersive theatre, and there's a little like show in the queue, and there's various, it's actually very hard to say, because the queue time will say it's 80 minutes, but actually generally it's not, because lots of those minutes are spent doing things. There are actually little pieces of theatre and like fun bits. They're not just waiting.
Right.
So it's hard to say when the attraction starts. You go through all these different bits, and it's fun. And I think that's something that I would love to see happen more, is that you don't have to have queue and then just one experience. You can have lots of sort of different kind of, and then it's hard to argue. Is it a play? It's kind of a bit of a show, and it's kind of a bit of a ride, and it's kind of a bit of a few things. And I really love those hybrid ones. So.
Yeah, I think those are, when they do it right, it makes it way more tolerable to be on that line, because then it becomes a much longer ride too.
Yeah, exactly. You don't feel so cheated.
I know, because most rides are like a couple minutes.
they are, and to be honest, the battle is often. I mean, one of the sort of creative tension points I think with all rides is that we are extremely conscious of throughput. People per hour is the metric. Which forces these things to be very short, but creatively we'd always rather they were longer, because it's a shame, isn't it, if you've just got into the headspace and then it's over. A roller coaster, I think, can't really go past a couple of minutes because it does your head in, but anything else a bit slower is actually fun if it's a bit longer. There's the Avatar ride, Flight of Passage at Animal Kingdom in Orlando, which is I think 4.5 minutes, something like that, and it feels exceptionally long just by comparison to its sort of counterparts, and it's lovely for that. Like, there's a bit halfway through where you think it's ending and you're like, don't end, and then it keeps going and going, and it's actually really, like, it feels long in the perfect way. It feels like you get your worth out of it,
Sure.
having done the line.
Now, have you actually designed, or do you have ambitions to actually design a ride? Like, someone comes up to you, so you have all this experience, Eugénie.
Yes and no. I mean, so I work in our team. We have a couple of creative directors, and we have actually some of the projects that we've worked on. We've been really heavily involved in the design of the overall experience, right down to track layout and stuff. I didn't personally do that bit, but it's definitely something that is in our kind of group's wheelhouse. And as for myself personally, I would love to, but I would always want to work as part of a team, only because I think the best work comes out of creative teams and creative interaction, and so I don't necessarily have fantasies to be like, I will be the person, but in terms of would I like to sort of lead and take one on, then I think that would be incredibly fun.
yeah. All right, so what are some of your favorite kinds of rides? Like, actually give us a run through, like, tell us some different kinds of rides and why. Because I think that's I can answer the question on what my favorites are, but I think that, like, to be honest, my favorites list is curated to try and show a spread of, like, I think roller coasters in their purest form are the big crazy ones that are outdoors generally, and they whiz around and they do tremendous G-forces. They can be amazing. I definitely prefer them when there's something visual or creatively stimulating other than just the feeling in your gut. And actually one of my very favorites is one that I was lucky enough to work on, which is VelociCoaster, the Jurassic World one in Orlando, Islands of Adventure, Universal Islands of Adventure, which is it's just, I can't claim credit to this bit at all because I did Q Media, but the ride itself is not only just a fantastically lovely, graceful, exciting track design, but there's all this just gorgeous rock work and scenery that you're diving in and out of, and it's just visually amazing. And at one point you get to the sort of top of the top hat, you see the whole park, and it's just all really, it's just really lovely and beautiful. And so that is a really, like, it's a really great roller coaster, which is fun. But then the funny part is that
you know, a lot of my favorites are the ones that I grew up with, right? So actually they're ones in the UK and things like that. And there's a roller coaster in Alton Towers in the UK called Oblivion, which was, I think, the world's first sort of vertical dive coaster. So it's very short. You just go up to the top, it sits you there for a moment, and then you dive back down again, but you go all the way underground. And that still is funny because roller coasters, basically these days I get no adrenaline, but that's one that I still get a little bit of a little bit of a feeling in my heart when you go down through the dive. So that's wonderful. And then outside of roller coasters and sort of thrill rides, super sort of creative. So dark rides is generally, we just mean it's inside a building, but usually that involves more theming, more sort of elaborate experience as a story. One of my favorites is the Spider-Man ride, again at Islands of Adventure. It was the first one to do as a technique which, depending on your point of view, is either called squinching, moving eye point, or perspective warping. As far as I understand it, it's because people have copyrights on the names, so which company you work with determines which of these phrases you use. But,
okay, explain what this is.
I will explain this. So what it is if you imagine that you have a big screen, it could be flat or it could be curved.
Okay.
It might be easier to explain if it's flat, and you want to create the illusion that that's a window to another extension of the set. So in reality, you have a physical set, you have a screen, but you want the people to believe that that's a window and there's further environment outside there. And
you can use 3D or not 3D glasses.
You can use 3D or not 3D. You can just have it 2D. It's up to you. But in both cases, you know, if you had a room full of people and they could move wherever they like, then you can't really create that illusion, because the person on this side of the room should be seeing something all the way over there, and the person on this side of the room should be seeing something all the way over there. But if you've got a ride vehicle and it's relatively sort of small compared to the size of that screen, then you can approximate that viewpoint as the center of the ride vehicle. So as the ride vehicle tracks past that screen, you can be adjusting the view that you see out of that screen, and then hopefully creating the illusion of continuous depth. Right. It's more effective if it's in 3D, but it can work either way. And that is very much a sort of, it's a wonderful illusion. It makes everything we do harder, because the ride vehicle movement is very often only really confirmed at the last stage of the project. So we need our cameras to have that very early on, and there's a kind of back and forth with that, and you know, very much you sometimes get a situation where at the very last minute you need to be re-rendering everything because the ride vehicle movement's changed, and so you need that warping to change. Okay, I have a question for you, just from someone who does a lot of lighting. Yeah. What lens do you use to try to get perspective to work to match your eyeballs? So there is no lens, and this is a thing that it took me a long time to understand. So if you imagine that this is a screen, and that my viewpoint is here, so this is where my rider is, or my ride vehicle. To determine what gets put onto each pixel, you're tracing a straight line out of that through the pixel and to whatever part of the environment. So depending how close you are. So if you track forward towards the screen, you're getting a widening of view in the same way that you walk towards a window and you can see more of the environment. Right. But it's not a specific lens, because if you imagine that your rider could go up to the top of the screen, down to the bottom of the screen, etc., you almost got a different lens for every pixel. Oh, that's crazy. So, yeah, and it's even crazier if you have a curved screen, because then you have effectively, I mean, you can imagine that, how do I describe it? It's so difficult. I've spent so many times drawing this diagram in my life, but if you have a big spherical screen, for example, you know, the most obvious thing to do is to put your camera at the center of the room. And if you've got loads of viewers in there, then that's what you would do. But if you've got a viewer that comes through the door and comes through the room and goes out the other door, and you've only got the one, then actually you've got a wildly different lens for each part of that image. So it has no lenses, but your lens as such is defined by the geometry of your screen and your viewing position. Right. And you also can't have a whole bunch of seats because everyone needs a different lens. Yeah, there is this kind of, and this is really subjective, that, you know, you are modeling, to do that, you are modeling the viewer as a single point in space, which means if you've got like a really big screen and you've got a little tiny ride vehicle with like 12 seats all clustered together, then that's actually a completely reasonable approximation.
Right.
But it's kind of like a geometric thing of like, how far can you get from that sweet spot before it starts to look weird and sort of psychedelically warpy and not great.
Right.
And you can kind of only test that by trying. We do a lot of mock-ups of that sort of thing in VR, just to sort of go like, okay, if the ride vehicle gets any bigger, it's going to look weird.
Right.
But then there's also there's whole things that can help or hinder, like straight lines. If you've got a curved screen and the material you're putting on it is full of straight lines, like you're doing a cityscape, that breaks down much faster. As in, if you're away from the sweet spot, all of the buildings look like they've got kinks in them, and so you spot that straight away. But a more organic environment, like a kind of jungle type
Or
thing,
a
you
cave
can get
or whatever, yeah.
right. You can get away with a lot more. So then, creative decisions can adjust it as well. So
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I've always wondered, like, how does that work and where does that go? But what about because I don't like rides where they make you put on 3D glasses.
oh yeah, it's a common complaint. Yeah.
It's because I just, I've actually gotten, so I had an infection in my ear.
Oh yeah.
And it turns out I ended up getting vertigo out of nowhere. And
Oh,
they said,
really?
oh yeah, it's basically you got a flu, but it affected your ear instead of everything else.
Okay.
And so he gave me Benadryl and said, it's the same as what's the motion sickness medication. And so I said, okay. And then he said, I've got bad news for you though. You will be very sensitive to motion sickness from now on in your life.
Oh no.
So I found that out and I was like, that sucks. And so yeah, I get very sensitive to that stuff. Although I used to love roller coasters, but I can do, I have a patch I can wear and that actually cures all of it. So
Oh really?
yeah. Magic patch. But I love the idea of what these things are. My kids absolutely love roller coasters, and the experiences now are so fantastic because of, it's not just waiting in this long line and then getting on this clunky wooden thing.
No, though I still love that, I will say. I mean, I have a great love of the complete high end, and then I also have a great love of the complete low end.
Yeah.
I think it's growing up on a sort of British beach resort and going down to the sort of rides that were falling apart on the seafront. I can enjoy both.
Yeah. Now, okay, so we covered those two rides. Is there another one?
More, I mean, certainly the Avatar Flight of Passage is pretty incredible. That's you ride a little. It's kind of almost like bike style, but the concept is that you're connecting to an avatar and riding a banshee, the creature, which is breathing. By the way, you can feel it
really?
breathing. Yeah, but you're kind of placed in front of this big dome screen with a very clever. They've got an illusion which hides the fact that you're going. So you put your 3D glasses on. And they're all kind of faceted clear plastic, and they shine little strobes into your light. So they take all the screen away, and they take the sort of protective screen away and bring in a screen and projectors, and you can't see any of it because you're being blinded by this stuff. And then you just find yourself you're on Pandora and you're flying. Okay. And it's really an incredibly beautiful media. I mean, just hugely high res and high frame rate.
Is this similar
gorgeous.
to like what's the one in Disneyland Flight?
Soaring.
Is it similar concept as Soaring?
Yeah, it is. The I think, not that I have the statistics to hand, but you have more movement in because I think your little bike thing that you sit on is on the end of a sort of cantilevered thing. So I think you get more actual movement to it, which is fun because you can have actual drops, things like that. But yes, they're lovely sort of flying experiences. It's just really effective, and it uses scent and sort of water mist in the air when you go over waterfalls and stuff. It just feels very tangible, and I think that's a pretty wonderful piece of creativity. I think, and then a great love of mine is The Mummy, Revenge of the Mummy at Universal, specifically the Orlando one.
Okay.
Because this is going to be a bit spoilery, but it just combines absolutely everything. It's a masterpiece. You start with a dark ride section with loads of animatronics and pyrotechnics, and that's already spectacular. Yeah. And you're like, wow, this is great. And then you get a full roller coaster section in the dark. And then you come to what feels like the end and everyone's laughing. This doesn't happen in the Los Angeles version.
Right.
And it looks like you're going to get off the ride. It's an unload bay. and there's a screen where you can see a silhouette of a sort of ride vehicle operator kind of about to summon you off the ride, and then she gets killed by the mummy. The ceiling gets set on fire. They do full brain fire in front of you, which like sort of is really close to you. You sort of shoot either forwards or backwards at that point, and then you get another roller coaster section, and then you finish the ride, which is like, it's just full of illusions and surprises.
Wow.
It's like a lovely piece, and it's there's just so many things that sort of it's just actually I can't wait to get back to it, because it's just closed for 7 months for renovation, and it's reopened,
Right.
and I'm hoping to get over there in the next couple of months. For me, that is, they just did all of the tricks. You know, they went for everything. We're going to do thrill, we're going to do right, we're going to do media, we're going to do illusions, we're going to do
Right.
jokes, and the brain fire to me is just absolutely incredible. I mean, it looks like the movie Backdraft, except the thing is that they're setting fire to the ceiling, I'm assuming pretty much every 20 seconds all day long, like every day.
Right.
And it's amazing to me that they can do that. They can do it safely to cue.
Yeah.
And all of that. It's just, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that would terrify me. Every 20 seconds they set the ceiling on fire.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, well that's interesting. What are some of the let's talk about, like, what do we like to get into doing the things you do? Like, if someone wants to do the kind of things you do. Like,
It's a tricky question to answer, because it's not I would say that, theme park design, ride design is not an enormous industry. It feels a bit like, looking at visual effects for feature film, which I think is, a lot of our backgrounds. There was a point in the 90s where there were like 12 clever people doing it on the planet, right? And then,
Right.
and then now there's just thousands upon thousands upon thousands, right? It's the companies are vast, and they have offices all over the world, and it's now a very obvious path. It's like they all have recruitment teams that come to, and come to universities, and that's what you do. I would say that, to me, ride design feels like a very small world at the moment. It feels like that, it's not 12 people on the planet by any means,
Sure.
but it's still very small. And so it's quite hard to kind of carve out this is the route, if this is what you want to do. But certainly it feels like, to me, just going to sort of there's various sort of conventions, expos for the themed entertainment industry. It feels like, you have your really big players, which are Walt Disney Imagineering, Universal Creative, Merlin Magic Making is pretty big. They do a lot of work internationally, Legoland and that sort of thing. And then you have an awful lot of companies that are smaller and independent. Either they serve their local theme parks, so you'll have a local theme park in a country will have an associated creative team.
Sure.
And then you have, your engineering firms that are actually looking at the steel. There's a large number of companies that just do the creative development side of it. So they tend to be smaller. They will work for a lot of the companies I've just talked about, or the companies that own theme parks will come to one of these agencies and go, we want, to see some ideas for this. And
sure.
so there's many, many, many companies. Other than Googling and having a look at them, it's hard to say this is the path to get into them, because they are so small and they're
There's
so
also
varied
so many
in their
different
skills.
things you can do, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that it's something that I would really recommend is trying to get to IAPA. So IAPA is International Amusement Parks. I'm going to get the letters wrong. I can't remember what they stand for. Let's just say it's the International. I think it's the International Association. Yes, International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. So they run these conferences. There's a big one in Orlando every November, and then they have one in Europe, one in Asia. Obviously, if you can get to it in person, great. If you can't, just use their online resources. I think they have an awful lot of sort of online communities and that kind of thing. But they are the big expos. They just have almost any company who supplies anything in any way to theme parks or the entertainment industry comes and has a stall. And it's incredibly useful just to see, what are the companies? Like, what are these things? What exists out there? Like,
Sure.
who's working in it? And I didn't know until I went to it sort of how, that there are companies that just look at creative. There are companies that look at creative and design build. There are companies that only look at design build. There's all these different things, and there's so many facets to it. And it kind of gave me an visibility of what the whole industry is. But like I say, I don't think going there in person if you happen to be near one is amazing. But if you can't, I think that, looking at that and the things like the Themed Entertainment Association, TEA, they all have these, they have like very active online communities where you can look at their websites, I'm sure, will be full of sort of sponsors and ways to link up with the various different companies.
Right.
And it just gives you places to start Googling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think those are some great resources. I think people would be very interested in looking into that. But how different, when you started doing that transition from working on Interstellar to working on this, like how different, or what was the similarities that you found the most, and what were the real big differences?
Yeah, I mean I was extremely lucky because even though on paper it looks like a really big change to go from feature film to building rides, as it were. I went from Double Negative to Framestore, where I had already worked. It wasn't like an actual huge shift in terms of the industry, because because very much we started out as just putting ourselves forward as we're making the visual effects for these rides, which means that I'd been doing visual effects for one thing and I just went and did visual effects for something else, and it was still very much the same industry. So, and there's an awful lot of overlap in terms of the specifically the visual effects work. I'm always saying to artists when they're considering making that move, I always say, we still model stuff, we still texture stuff, we still rig stuff, we still animate stuff, we still render stuff. There's an awful lot of you. There's no conversion at all.
Right.
But the difference is there's always going to be this extra little layer of technological complexity, because either you have to animate but think about the whole space, or you have to light but consider the actual blueprints of the real lighting in the space. So, there's often an extra consideration.
Sure.
Or just sheer numbers of frames. I mean, we just have insane numbers of pixels and insane numbers of frames.
Lots of pixels,
stuff.
yeah.
Lots of pixels and lots and lots and lots of frames. Frame rate's very high, and
Right.
So those things, make your artist jobs a little bit more demanding sometimes, or a little bit more challenging, but also potentially more rewarding. So it depends on your point of view.
Sure.
So for me, it was a smooth transition, but as we're getting more involved in the overall sort of creative of the physical side of it as well, the ride vehicle stuff, we did an attraction a few years ago, Midnight Ride, which was a motorbike experience where you had VR headsets on. It was all real time, and you could steer the motorbike, so within reason, you had some freedom of the path that you were going on. So it all had to be real time. And that was one where you couldn't really separate the ride vehicle programming from the media, because it was like, well, this just has to work as a unit. It's like having a controller for a game. This is a thing that just has to work. So that's where you get more and more involved in the technology of it. And obviously, from that point of view, you need people with, potentially a bit more either interest or skills in programming, engineering, those kinds of things, which are less called for in feature film.
Right.
But,
Yeah. Okay. So what's the future of rides? Like we knew there's always been these changes, and the demand for the newest thing is huge in rides.
Yeah,
right. So
yeah.
where do you see the future of rides going right now?
I mean, I think that I hope it has a very bright future, because I think that there's been there's obviously a lot of question marks hovering over, and I don't think that cinemas will 100% go away, but I think there's a lot of people concerned that like Netflix is in many ways more appealing to people streaming than going to the cinema, and there's a lot of concern about that, whereas I feel like location-based things are really thriving. And actually there was a bit at the beginning of COVID where that didn't look like the case anymore. We were like, no one wants to go anywhere because they don't want to breathe other people's air. So,
Right.
maybe we're dead. But I think these days, because streaming at home is an option and it's very convenient, but it's taken a lot of the glamour out of going out and having a night out and all of that. Actually, people are looking for things where they can go to a special place and do something they can't do at home. So to
Right.
me, it feels like there's a very bright future in parks. As to the technology of rides, I think more interactive stuff. So definitely looking at real time as a growth thing. But a sense that it isn't the same every time you go on it, I think is very appealing. I think a sense of, I mean, increasingly we're seeing with as I touched on, Rise of the Resistance and the new hotel, the Star Wars hotel at Disney and so on, there's more of a sense of introducing you as a character. So it's kind of that LARPing thing, which is a real sort of growth area. Is like, an example would be, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is what everything is going to be 5 years from now, but you know, if you book your tickets and you get given a character, this is the costume, this is what your background is. You need to, when you come to the park, you need to find these 5 gemstones, which you're going to, like, you know, that's your mission, and you know, and that's the kind of thing that's being looked at quite a lot, is sort of, you know, making it a great big LARP or a great big game that you're going into, and you know, those sorts of things. You know, it's got its pros and cons. I think the sense of interactivity is really great. Like there's a little known, I think, treasure hunt, scavenger hunt thing in the area around Pirates of the Caribbean in Orlando. There's all these little hidden animatronics, and you can go to this little, it's like a little hut, and they'll give you a treasure map, and the treasure map is just of the area of the park, and it's all linked to an RFID chip, I think, memory serves, you have it, and so the map will tell you where to go next, and you go next, and if you touch your little RFID chip onto the sensor, the animatronic will come to life and do a little thing for you, and then your app will tell you where to go next on your map. Oh, cool. And it's I'm sure lots of people do it, but it's one of those things that people don't really, because the rides are big and they can see them, they don't know that that's happening. But it's a lovely little experience, and I've done it a few times, and they give you different maps each time, so you find new things.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
So I think that kind of interactivity, individualizing the experience is really appealing, and drawing that into rides as well. There's often a conversation that goes like, if you were to, you know, on an app, define an avatar that's you, like everyone loves at the beginning of video games where you get to make your character. Yeah. And then there's real-time rides, should you appear as your avatar automatically when you get into them, things like that. So there's that crossover of games and rides, which I think is really interesting. I mean, like I say, my personal kind of wish and love is to blur the distinctions a bit more. I feel like there's a lot still of the thing where, you know, one thing is definitely a show. You sit down in rows of seats and you watch it, and that's cool. And then there's a roller coaster where it's definitely a roller coaster. You sit down, you pull down your restraint, and you do the thing. But like, I like the ones that blur those distinctions, where, you know, as I said, with Rise of the Resistance and with the Mummy, where it's like, well, it's kind of all of those things. You get a bit of each, and you know, there's, and I think those kinds of things are sort of potentially more overwhelming, you know, full immersive experience is maybe, I hope, where we're going.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even think about the fact that, I mean, I realized that the theaters are starting to have less interest in them, and the only thing in theaters are pretty much Marvel or Disney films. So I think Marvel and Disney are probably okay.
I think they're all right. I mean, I suppose what I'm conscious of is that if you look at the number of people going to the movie theatre or the cinema every week in the 1950s, and you look at it now, it's plummeted. It's absolutely plummeted. Yeah. Not just in the last few years with streaming, but, you know, it used to be the main activity you had, because you didn't necessarily have a TV at home, you know. Right. So and I guess there is a question of, like, do people still want to do it? I mean, it's quite fun if the speaker system's really good and stuff, but then
people can have good speakers at their house.
That's the thing. And I will admit that a few years ago, I would have said to you, well, I'll never stop going. I've got wonderful cinemas around me and I love going, and that's the thing. And I'm going much less. I've got a good system at home, and like, I'm a snob, and you go along and one of the speakers is broken, and there's, oh, it's not a spider, it's just a twig. I'm really jumpy because I went kayaking in Texas a couple of weeks ago, and a massive spider just crawled over my face, and I don't know how it got on me.
I know, and you have arachnophobia.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of like left over, but I think that I think that there is certainly a kind of like cinemas dying question.
But there was also this thing, like suddenly I think Disney decided rides are going to be about movies.
Oh,
right. And so
yes. Yes.
And rides don't have to be about movies, but now they have to. So this whole idea of franchises has happened, right?
It breaks, I shouldn't say it, but it does break my heart a bit. I think I guess the thing is that
It's effective, though. It's very effective.
yeah. I mean, look, I guess the thing is, I'm not going to say, I don't want to sort of lazily say like, oh, it's just, they've just got no ideas anymore, because I think, well, no, actually, they've got some ideas of trying to. I mean, it's certainly, if you look at what's happening with Star Wars and Marvel, they are creating with the longer form stuff, with having vast numbers of movies and TV and stuff. They're looking at much more complex and multi-layered stories and and full universes, full worlds that people really love. And I can understand why they want to bring that to life in the physical world around you. And I can see why that's ended up with rides being part of those IPs. But the sad part for me is that the rides, the rides I loved growing up with weren't based on a movie. They were their own fully realized world, that existed just for that experience. And I think it just becomes quite repetitive and limiting only to be looking at IPs. So then, I see both sides of it. I mean, yes, almost everything we do, not absolutely every single one, but almost everything we do comes from a film franchise. And I'd like to see
if it doesn't, then we make a film about it.
Well, yes, you can go both ways, obviously.
Pirates of the Caribbean, no problem. We'll
Absolutely.
make that into a movie.
Haunted Mansion.
Yeah. Yes. So I think it's very interesting. But I think that there's some interesting the experiences I have. Listen, I like going to Disneyland. I'm not a big Disney person, but I love going to Disneyland, and it's just. Part of me is like, and it's like, oh, but I'm going to have a good time. Trust me, I'm going to have a good time.
It's really nice.
Yeah. So it's really cool. And I also like the fact that some of the rides are not necessarily just about the roller coasters and the G's, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Disney actually has very few real thrill rides. It's not big on that. It's big on, like, generally family friendly, but like really quite beautifully curated story rides. Like that's what they do, and they do brilliantly. And I think the Universal much more of the kind of thrill market, but I think it's nice to look at the fact that you can have things all on that spectrum. I mean, the most recent again, I wasn't involved in it, but Cosmic Rewind, which is the new Guardians of the Galaxy roller coaster at Epcot, it's really great. Like it's really good. It's thrilling enough to be fun. Right. But it's not crazy. You don't go upside down. It doesn't give you a potential headache. Right. It's like it's fun, it's family friendly, but it's got just a lovely integration of story and fun and music, and it's just good. You can make it good without making it extreme, you know. Not that I mind the extreme ones, but
okay, so China's got to be making a huge amount of roller coasters these days.
So China at the moment, it's kind of strange. It was. There was a period in which we worked on a whole bunch of stuff in China in a row, including whole parks where we did 5 attractions at once and stuff. And that was sort of 5 years ago. The amount of Chinese work that's coming our way seems to have really, really, really dropped off. And I don't know, to be honest, maybe this is a bit naive. I don't think I know enough about China's kind of financial situation to know exactly why that's happening, whether those things just aren't being built because of, I don't know, recessions or things like that, or whether I do know that there had been a desire in the Chinese government to reduce the amount of trade backwards and forwards between China and like the West, and therefore I don't know if it's that those things are still being built but they're not coming our way, the work is being kept internally in China, or if it's just paused. I know that they had an awful lot of problems with COVID in terms of closure of the borders and all of that, so I'm not really sure. I mean, we, at Framestore we did Pearl Quest, which was this one-off ride, and then we did Lionsgate Entertainment World, which was the full park down in Zhuhai, and then we were also involved with Universal Beijing, which opened sort of during COVID. So very sadly, I've not been out there yet. I worked on it for 5 years. Wow. and I have not yet not yet been able to go and visit, which I'm pretty desperate to do. But maybe when the quarantine goes.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I find that fascinating. So what are, I know you're working on stuff that you can't talk about under NDA, but what can you say, here's the most recent rides that you guys have done that would be exciting for people to look at?
Okay. So the things that we can talk about, certainly the suite of Jurassic World was just really great. There's loads of stuff to love there. We did projects in Hollywood, in Orlando, and in Beijing.
Okay.
Really cool stuff.
Which ones are your favorites? Which are the ones in Hollywood? Because that's where I live very close to that.
Hollywood. So it was an update of the boat ride. So it was Jurassic Park. It's now Jurassic
the updated
World.
one. Yeah.
So we did the Q Media. There's a sort of like, when you're queuing, there's like an internal TV channel almost, as if you're a guest worker at the park. So that was the media we did. I think that's quite a lot. I think there's like 90 minutes of media on those screens or something like that. Okay. So there's a lot of work there. And we looked after the shoot like as a production company. So we did the shoot with the A-listers for all of that and stuff, and scripted and directed it. And so that was really cool. And VelociCoaster is my favorite. That's in Orlando, or at least it's not my favorite. It's my favorite that I've been on. I suspect my favorite will be the dark ride that we did in Beijing, which was the biggest project for us. Right. But I haven't been yet, so it's not my favorite yet. But hopefully will be when it. Then what else can we talk about? Did the Jumanji ride in Gardaland in Italy, which. Super involved in a lot of the creative on that, so that was really cool. And then other things, I'm trying to remember what we've allowed to put press releases out for. I mean, annoyingly, a whole bunch of stuff that is the Museum of the Future in Dubai. That was actually a really cool project. That was it's a museum, and the idea of it is that you step into this capsule, which is actually a lift that takes you up to the top floor, but it's dressed as a space capsule, and so out of the windows you see yourself going up into space and docking into a space station. But it's really beautiful, actually. It's a lovely experience, which I think I'm allowed to tell you about, though if I'm not, I'll email you and then you can cut out that section of the thing. But annoyingly, there's a whole lot of other stuff that opened this summer, but we are on the cusp of being allowed to talk about it. But I can't yet.
All right. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. You've done exactly 1 hour, so it's perfect.
Yay.
So we did great. And listen, it's been awesome meeting you. Hopefully we will stay in touch with each other over the years. So,
absolutely.
And this is your third THU, you said?
It's my third, yeah.
Okay. All right. So you'll probably be back.
I hope so.
All right. Awesome. Well, great seeing you. Thank you for doing this.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.